This is going to sound strange because I've been a pastor, and so my life has been focused around the church. But we wanted our kids' relationship with God to transcend the church. So the church is not perfect. Any church has difficulties. Any church has relational issues. Any church has growing pains. Every church has some type of betrayal in it. Every church has some type of issue, conflict. It's all there. There's regular people in churches going through the sanctification process, and they're working together. So all these things pop up. And a lot of times over the years, people's experience in church has been negative at times. And what you find out is you'll hear people say, well, I grew up in this church and it was like this, and that's why I don't go to church anymore. And a lot of times what they're saying is, my relationship with God was tied to the church, and then when the church did what they did, I didn't have a relationship with God anymore. So do I think church is important? Absolutely. I think God set it up, designed it, made it an institution for people to be a part of and for the gospel to flourish through. The issue is I wanted my kids' relationship with him not to be totally dependent on the church. The church is where we get discipled. The church is where we get equipped. All those, the church is where we have family and friends, and we share each other's burdens. But if the church goes bad, it doesn't mean that my relationship with God goes bad. And so what we started doing early is saying, look, the church is important. It's God's design for you to have community and to be equipped to do what he called you to do. But the church is not God. And so we wanted our kids' relationships to transcend church because we didn't know where they were going to end up. We didn't know what kind of jobs they were going to have. It's not uncommon for people to work on Sundays. It's not uncommon for people to be in other countries and not have in countries that don't have the same traditions as ours, going to church on a Sunday. So we wanted to make sure that even if our children moved somewhere, like our oldest daughter studied at Cardiff University in Wales. Well, that's not a church-going culture. There were churches there, but they're very few and far between compared to here. So you're gonna have to kind of search one out. And we wanted her to be plugged into a church, but we didn't want her relationship with God to be totally dependent on her being plugged into church. So that was one of the things we started to think about early, was like, how do we structure our life in a way and what we teach our kids in a way that their relationship with God transcends all these other things, all these other good things, but bad things as well. And how can we train them up so that even if calamity hits, the relationship with God doesn't suffer? So that was a very important thing to us. And it's played out over the years that when they become adults, their relationship with God transcends going to college, at a big university where there's all kinds of stuff to get into, and getting married and getting careers and moving 10 hours away, all those things. Their relationship with God transcended all that. And so that was right at the end of the day, that was the goal. That was the goal. We want their relationship with God to be the foundation and be built on God and not peripheral things, whether good or bad.
I like that. So speaking of relationships, and this may make sense, it may not in this context, but how do we then as people, believers or regular people, how do we expand our capacity and not alienate people or become alienated by people at the same time? Is that possible, or does change naturally bring about a sense of division and alienation?
I think life happens in seasons. I tend not to think about whether people are alienated from me or not. I think life happens in seasons. So when our kids were playing soccer, there were people we were around all the time. Some of those people became lifelong friends, not all of them. So there were people we hung around with every weekend when the kids played soccer. A few of those we're still friends with today, not all of them. So that was a season of life we're in. So they say you have 2 or 3 lifelong friends, real close friends. And I think that tends to be true. So if again, this goes back to personality and capacity. If you're a personality type that feeds off of other people and you need people around you all the time, you may find it a little more devastating when seasons of life change. Like, oh, my kid went from elementary school to intermediate school and now we're not hanging around the same parents. This is devastating. There will be more seasons like that where the people we associate with is not good or bad. It's just a season of life. And if we attempt to keep all those people tight, 50, 60 people in our lives, super close, super tight, you just wear yourself out. Wear yourself out. So you think about in the context of the gospel, how do I serve the people God's put me around in this season?
Okay. That's a completely different way of thinking of it.
Yeah. So you grew up in Baltimore, you had friends in Baltimore. You left Baltimore and came to West Virginia. It would be naive to think that you could have the same level of friendship with the people you used to be. They might have been great people, but it would be really naive to think 2 hours away you could sustain that same relationship you had in Baltimore when you lived there.
That's true.
Well, that would be a guilt that you shouldn't bear because the season of your life changed. You became an adult, you got married, you had kids, you started a career outside of Baltimore, all those things, and they were all good. There was nothing bad about that. And so depending on your personality type, those things can be more difficult or less difficult. I tended to look at it as God put us. Now, we've lived in the same town. We lived in the same house a long time. We've had the same neighbors. We've been at the same church. But even in that context, seasons change. And I'm closer to people in one season than I am in another. And I don't look at that as a good or bad thing. I just look at it as seasons. And how do I effectively pour into the people, serve the people that God put me around in that season for as long as that season lasts. And I think if we're faithful to do that, then we bear fruit in those seasons.
That's good.